Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil A. Colonna, and this is Nashville. Local chaplain and trans rights advocate Dahron Anneliese Johnson has lived a life of service. She uses the message of healing to help assist others. Now let's learn more about her life. I'd like to welcome Dahron Anneliese Johnson to the show. Dahron, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to This Is Nashville.
Thank you so much. It's really lovely to be here with you this afternoon.
It really is a pleasure. Okay, so one question I'd like to ask our profile guests is, what's on your mind today? Or, what did you wake up with this morning?
Absolutely. You know, it's funny. Earlier today, I was in a meeting where I asked everybody what their emotion word was for today. And when it came up to my turn, I found myself saying determined. This week has been a tough one in the legislature. And yet, as I come to the end of those tough hearings, those tough votes, I find myself more determined than ever to find a way forward, to demonstrate the positive example, the positive additive presence that my life and those of all of our community of communities offer, not just to this city, but to this state. And I look forward to the ways that we can continue to demonstrate that, whether that's in committee rooms or in offices or in our normal workspaces or, I don't know, in radio stations every once in a while.
Yeah.
Just determined.
How much has determination played a part in the work that you do? It sounds like you have to be a pretty determined person just to engage in it, to entertain the thought of getting into this work.
I would say that it comes from a willingness to keep on trying to find a way forward. Someone gave the image a couple of days ago, like water over a rock. It finds all the cracks and crevices to find a path through something that seems impossible to get through. But yet, water demonstrates that there is a way through that rock, through that hard place. And that's been my experience with the legislature. It's a very hard place, but if you're willing to kind of stick with it and sort of ebb and flow with that process, one can work to find ways. Not all of them are successful, but you then just keep trying, flowing around and trying to find where that way forward is.
It's like a marriage of determination and patience.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair. One of the things that I feel like I have experienced over my life is a patience I didn't even know I needed because I didn't know what the outcome would be. I knew that there was something different about me from an early age, but I didn't know exactly how to express that, how to frame that. And so I certainly didn't know how then to live it out per se. But I kept on readjusting myself to my own life, trying to find those ways forward in my own life until I came to a place where I realized the best way that I'm really going to stretch this metaphor now, right? But the best way that the water of my life could continue to flow forward was to become to other people the me that I already have been, but just couldn't show to the world, didn't know how to show to the world, didn't know how to express to the world in a positive way, in an I am Dahron, I am trans type of way. Once I was able to find a way forward with that, then I could look back and say, wow, I really have taken the long view path on how to get here, which has taken more patience than I probably ever gave myself credit for before.
I hear that. Now, let's look at your life. Up to this point in your life, you've been an opera singer, hospice chaplain, athlete, and trans advocate. I want to step back for a minute. Tell me about your folks. Where did you grow up, and what was your childhood like?
Sure. To start where I am now, I'll say, being a chaplain, it's almost like Godfather 3, when Al Pacino says, every time I try to get out, they pull me back in.
Yes.
Right? So my parents met in divinity school at Yale in the early 60s. So in some ways, it feels like this place in my life was a little predestined, right?
Okay.
The irony there, though, is that both of my parents realized during that first year that it wasn't actually the right path for them, or it wasn't the right path right then. So my mom, being the ever determined and task-oriented type, realized early that a Master of Divinity wasn't going to be the right path for her, but went ahead and saw it out anyway.
Okay.
Then went on, got a master's in sociology, and taught sociology for 45 plus years. My dad thought, this isn't exactly the right time yet. Went and got a master's in English teaching, and then a PhD in literature, and taught at university and colleges for 15 or so years before he came back to the ministry and closed out his career, his last 20 or so years in the ministry. And it wasn't until I was just entering my double digits, as it were, that I really had church as a regular part of my life. Before that, it was kind of a house of two academics, and we were moving to where the academic jobs were, for neither of them were tenured at the time. So, you kind of float from institution to institution. But what I saw from both of them in any of those spaces was a commitment from my mom, both to this strong sense of ethic that has continued to fuel me to this day. And for her particularly, it was, how do we involve as many voices as possible in the conversations around whatever thorny subject it is that we're trying to figure out? She really did say frequently, the solution can most often be found through many voices, not fewer. And even in her work, she talked about taking a multidisciplinary approach. For her, that there really wasn't another way to do ethics. And I carry that forward from my mom. And then on my dad's side, he was really devoted to people and their stories, which I guess isn't surprising for somebody who had a PhD in literature. He really valued and tried to hold space for the importance of how people told their stories about their own lives and came to understand their world through that. And that carried forward into his ministry as well. I think he was always less invested in him being a person that was telling a story that would give specific moral structure to other people's lives, versus his approach, which I think was to, kind of like my mom, hear as many voices and their unique stories as possible, and to find ways to hone a moral message, an ethical message that met the broadest swath of people where they were. And that's something that I continue to carry forward, whether it's in advocacy or in hospice work, because in hospice cases, it might as well be the bumper sticker for all hospice work, which is meeting folks where they are and figuring out how to go forward from there. And I feel like that sense really came through from my dad about how to meet folks where they are.
Where did your family settle? You bounced around different universities. Did you all settle somewhere?
Well, and we bounced around a lot when I was younger, too, which actually reinforced that many voices notion. I was adopted at birth. My parents tell a story of figuring out my name and whether they had all the right supplies in a diner in Buffalo, New York, where they were both doing their PhD work. But then a few months after that, my dad was hired at Augusta College in Augusta, Georgia. My mom was hired there shortly thereafter. And so we went from Buffalo, New York to a place they could rent outside Augusta in the early 70s. I think it was like a 500 head cattle and hog farm, right? So you couldn't have much more different. And that kind of bounce up and down the East Coast continued through a lot through when I was 10, 11, 12. But I think that constant change of locale, change of folks that I was around also helped me gain this kind of innate understanding of just how many different types of folks that there were in the world and how many different ways that you could go to meet them. My parents would joke that, kind of given their own example, that really that MDiv type education helps prepare you for any other type of work that you want to do, because it forces you to reckon with a big chunk of history and to think about the ways that people carry that history within them, and then also use it to inform not just sort of their inner selves, but also the actions that they then take in the world. And I think that combination that I chose was really a way of trying to figure those same things out in my own way.
In the intro, I talked about how you grew up in this male body, but now you've transitioned. I mean, your entire life, you mentioned that you've always felt different. You felt something inside.
Well, I want to go back a second if I can. I was waiting tables for, a well-known chain restaurant. But I was averaging 70 hours a week, had a relationship that didn't go great. All those early 20 things that you do, right? But this self was still trying to figure out a way to articulate and show itself to the world. And in the late 80s, early 90s, that was a very different time as far as the ways that we not only talked about trans folks, but really at the height of kind of monstrification, of vilification of gay folks, of other types of, and to use a word that we would use now that was just being reclaimed by ACT UP back then, right? All types of queer folks. All I could see to do in that moment was to be able to describe the self in negative terms, to say, I am not this monster that you make us out to be. I am not, worse than worse, because that's really the way that trans lives were positioned. If gay males were this bad, then trans folks must be, even further off the scale. And to my parents' credit, they really affirmed who I was, however I wanted to be, right? Grow up to be such and such, that's fine. We'll support you all along the way. The problem is that I heard that from the outside from them, but I was dissatisfied. I was unsettled in myself. And so I wondered what the disconnect was. And that really created a sense of hopelessness in my early 20s, and had some pretty dark times. And there's a point where a friend of mine had committed suicide, just kind of driven off into the Appalachian Mountains, parked his truck, and then disappeared. And when I'd gotten word of that, it was just really bereft, really overwhelmed. And not to put too fine a point on it, but actually kind of hunkered down in a closet for a number of days, just trying to get past this sense of, what am I going to do with this self? In a world that seems to be driving such good people like my friend to just walk off into the distance, in a world that seemed to monstrify and vilify whatever internal sense of myself that I had, what path forward was there for me? And in the midst of that moment, I didn't know how to move forward. I sat there and I sat there and I sat there, and then finally decided that I needed to be able to take a step forward. And if I was going to do that, I would never let myself get to that place of hopelessness again. I kind of became resolute and just trying to be happy as, sort of a masculine-bodied person. But flash forward 20, 25 years, and I realized that I was getting close to that place of hopelessness again. I said to a care provider, they asked, well, how do you see yourself living this out? And I said, why? Why would I? What hope is there in this? And as soon as I heard myself say that, I realized that I was this close to that place of hopelessness that I had been 25 years before, and that I promised that I would never let myself get to again. And it was at that moment that I realized that it was now or never. I had to find a way to articulate a positive self, that I had to step forward as this person who was always this person, but just not demonstrated to the rest of the world. And so by the end of that day, I had made my first phone call to try to figure out where to get an appointment, where to just talk to somebody about this, not to make it about broader political issues, right? But that's the first step of any gender affirming care, is just finding somebody that you can talk with, right? Trying to understand what it is, all these questions that one has going on in your head. And so I made those phone calls to start having those conversations. And, well, here I am today. So this is about four years later.
Here you are at this moment. But you promised yourself you weren't going to get back in this place. You know, it'd been 25 years, but you found yourself close to there. During the course of that 25 years, you found yourself in a marriage, a wonderful, strong marriage that still lasts right now. What can you share with us about your marriage through your transition?
Well, I think that my work is in grief and with folks in tough times really helped, because there was loss and change in that in that process. Those are parts of our lives, regardless. My mom gave me a joke beer cozy as a gag gift one year that said, "Change is inevitable, except from vending machines," right? And I try to hold on to that as a mantra, right? That change is inevitable. We're going to face these moments. And what, for me, I wanted that marriage to continue to be strong. I wanted our relationship to be able to grow as we continue to go on. And for me, I got to a place where I realized if I wasn't showing up with an authentic self, then that relationship was going to suffer. And I feel strongly, too, that any relationship, whether it's a work relationship, a friendship, if we're not showing up as ourselves, then something in that dynamic is going to suffer. It's not going to be as whole and as full as it could be. I felt not only for my own health, but that for the health of us, that really the only thing I could do was to say, hey, wherever we go from here, this is the me that has to be present. And that certainly, I think, has had its challenges along the way. As a spouse, she was having to come to terms with understanding this part of the self that I had kept hidden. I have a lot of grief and guilt about that, but over such a huge chunk of my life had come to feel like sharing that would be so unsafe, would be so dangerous, that I didn't feel like I had much of a choice but to keep it hidden.
When you found out that it wasn't unsafe and it was not dangerous to share that, how did you feel?
Overwhelmed by its loveliness, I think, is the best way to put that. We have given ourselves the opportunity to see each other more fully, to embrace each other more closely, and to understand the respective challenges that we've both felt and maybe not had a full realization of from the other, because we've allowed that openness between each other.
Let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll dig into Dahron's experience in grief work and how that has impacted her role as a hospice chaplain. We'll be right back.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Colonna, and this is Nashville. My guest today is Dahron Anneliese Johnson, hospice chaplain and expert in grief work. Now, before the break, we learned a little bit about her life. Now let's turn to her beliefs on grief. Dahron, thanks again for being with us.
Of course.
We have a clip of you giving a sermon at a church last year. Let's take a listen to that.
How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long? Where are you? I carry hurt in my bones, and anguish has wounded me deep to my core. Yet none of this makes me feel as lost as does the sense that you, God, have forgotten me. No, it is more than that. It would be grief enough if it seemed I had somehow, some way, just passively slipped your mind, something itself I thought beyond the realm of possibility. However, to be caught in this moment, in which it feels like you have actually, actively turned your back on me? I mean, it is one thing to know, to feel my enemies lord their seeming might over me. But at least in that moment, and in some twisted way, I feel seen, acknowledged. It is another thing entirely to feel ignored by my own Savior. Who wouldn't cry out in such a lament? I would argue many of ourselves now and today resonate deeply with the psalmist's desperation and anguish because they and we can sense how the words themselves were lived and suffered. We know with embodied recognition those twinned senses of loss and abandonment, and what it is to wonder, where are those who would protect us, save us? Have they forgotten us? Are they blocking our calls, this prayer? When will they pick up? How long, God? How long?
Okay, so that clip was of you preaching the Psalms last year.
Right.
And I hear very, very intense emotion in your voice.
Mm.
It kind of sounds like you're talking from personal experience here. Faith, again, determination, and grief. What have you learned about faith and grief from your own life experiences?
I feel like we really need to, first and foremost, attend closely and believe fully what folks are telling us about what they experience in the world. If I get to sound like a chaplain at one moment during this conversation, it's going to be the moment right after we've done a sermon clip, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So as long as we're clear on that.
Awesome.
But there's a section in Job where his companions see that he's grieving, see him sitting in the dirt, and simply sit in the dirt with him and cry. Sit in the dirt with him and wail. 3 days later, they had had enough, got up and tried to put all their, fool explanations on him, which drove Job to distraction. Job kept on saying, "Where's the one who will defend me in all this?" But that one moment, those 3 days where the companions sat in the dirt with him, it was one of the best examples that we have of what attending to grief and attending to those that are hurting. We're not trying to put an explanation on it. We're not even trying to talk about it. We're simply there, present with them. And I think one of the hardest things that any of us can do is actually be present in that way. The fact that we often try to kind of blow that off or discount that type of presence by saying, oh, if I'd go see Joe today, right, I don't know what I'd say. I'd just sit there, right? Yeah, exactly. You'd sit there, take the just out, and you'd sit there. The fact that we keep on trying to find ways to quickly get up from sitting in the dirt with folks, I think demonstrates just how hard it is to do that. And so to be conscious of when folks are asking, when folks are demonstrating that they need somebody present for them like that, present with them like that, is the first key step on how to really be present with folks in their grief. One of the things that I think about a lot is that the only way that we have an understanding of what's going on in other people's lives is their report to us through what they do or what they say of what's going on in their internal lives. And there's so much that we believe about what's going on with them without even thinking about it, right? You could tell me that you've got, I don't know, a tummy ache, right, today. And I don't have any way to know that for sure sitting over here on this side of the desk, right? But I'll believe you on that, right? And you could say, oh, I'm a true Christian believer, or I've been a follower of Islam for, my whole life. And I wouldn't question that. I would just believe it. But when it comes to our identity, all of a sudden we throw up a wall. All those other things are equally internal, equally imperceptible to us on the outside, except for the way that person reports and shows us in the world. And yet in this one place, we go, put the brakes on. I can't believe you on that one. The headache, I can't see. The stomach ache, I can't see. I'll believe you on that. How your faith works for you and how it's important in your life, I'll believe you on that. But this equally complex and nuanced determinant of our life that we ourselves carry internally and have to figure out how to embody and live into every day and live with every day, we go, I get to decide that for you. You don't get to decide your own report. And so those places of how to sit with folks in grief and attend to them has been really instrumental in the way that I've come to think about the expression of my own identity, and also then in conversation with others as they try to explain the journeys that they've had and the changes that they've had to experience and the losses they've had to often experience because, again, other folks impose their perceptions rather than believing that person's own report, which was the problem in the Job story as well, too, that the companions got up and start saying, no, let me tell you why you're having the problems that you're having, rather than listening to him. And we do the same thing with folks when it comes to gender, even though we'll believe all types of other internal stuff.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Akolona. We're talking this hour with chaplain and trans activist Dahron Anneliese Johnson. So, you kind of mentioned it before, but how can grief be the catalyst we need?
I would say if we reframe the notion of grief so that we don't think about it as only coming with some big loss in our, or like those big key moment losses in our lives. Any type of change carries with it a type of loss, right? Because we're experiencing the move from this thing we knew to something else, small or big, right? And in the process of those losses, which we don't even think of those things as losses most of the time either. But in the process of that, I really do believe that we accumulate these stores of sorrow, these wells of grief that we don't even know the depth of because we don't want to look in there. It's grief. It's painful. It hurts. I have to think about the things that I had that I don't have any longer, whether that's just a pattern of getting around my day. I used to love going to that coffee shop on the corner, but it's closed now, and now I got to do something different, right? I love seeing, neighbor Barbara every time I went in there, and now I don't get to see him the same way. But we kind of just shove that loss into the back of our minds, onto the back of our mental stovetops, and we continue on. And I don't think that we need to go around in sackcloth and ashes all the time, right? But we do need to be more honest with the type of losses that we're experiencing and accumulating, because again, in a moment where we interact with somebody else who is grieving, all of that stored up loss, all of that well of sorrow, right, will come forward in ways that we don't expect and block us from being able to fully hear and appreciate the experience of the other. And we end up processing our own stuff and thinking about our own stuff and how upset we are now. Oh, yeah, this all started with you saying that you were hurting, right? And that gets lost in the process.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Let's take one more break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Dahron Johnson and learn about their work pursuing legislation that gives protections to the rights of the trans community. You can join the conversation by tweeting us at This Is Nashville. We'll be right back. I'm Khalil A. Colonna, and this is Nashville. My guest today is Dahron Anneliese Johnson, a chaplain and trans rights advocate. Now, Dahron, you were recently the first openly trans person ever to lead a prayer on the Tennessee House floor at the end of January. First, what is prayer for you today?
That's an absolutely fabulous question. Prayer comes in so many different shapes and sizes. I think we too often think of prayer only as this moment in which we bow our heads, in which we close our eyes. That can be important. It helps us focus. It helps us be intentional about pausing and trying to connect with a voice, with a sense of more, whatever name one wants to put on that sense of beyond oneself that one tries to connect with in prayer. But I don't think it is making it too abstract to focus in on the intentionality of what we're going for in prayer, and to say that when I am setting a foot forward along a new path, that I may be doing that, trying to be attentive to that voice, that urging towards a better place, an urging towards a action that leads more towards the good, that only comes when I'm trying to be intentional about connecting to something beyond myself. So the clasped hands and the bowed heads allows for a certain type of intentionality, a step along a new path, or a more determined voice in a space where one hasn't spoken before. Also themselves are types of prayer, because in all of those instances, one can be trying to attend to that sense of more that lures us, that urges us towards the good.
Now, let's listen to the prayer that you gave on the Tennessee House floor at the end of January.
God of one and many, God of small, still voice and prophetic thunder, speak so that all might hear your voice. Speak through the work of those called to this house, and speak through the voices of all they are sent here to represent. In honoring those who have helped their communities, hear their voices, hear our prayer. In working to offer shelter, food, health care, education for all who need these essentials, hear their voices and hear our prayer. In working to assure this state offers welcome, safety, and foundations from which we can all flourish, whoever, wherever, and however we are in the world, hear their voices and hear our prayer. In attending to each other, in attending to those who send us to this space, in attending to you, O God, we ask you help us release all that would keep us from hearing and giving voice to the lives of all affected by the work of this house and assembly. We ask all this. We thank you for all this. In your name. And let the people say, Amen.
Representative Bain will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America.
Now, I have to say, and maybe I'm searching a little bit, I don't hear anyone else saying amen at the end of your prayer, even though you led for that response. You said, let the church say amen, and there was silence. How were you received in our State House?
Well, first of all, I have to give a big thanks to my state representative, to Afton Bain, for simply entertaining the notion in the first place. We had been talking about ways to demonstrate the kind of normalcy of trans experience, right? I go to my job. Before I was here at the studio today, I was racing over in the rain in Nashville traffic to pick up my son and bring him back home before I came over. All the normal things, right? And I said, we really want to demonstrate just sort of the normal things I do for my job. Heck, just get me up there to do the invocation. And she looks across the table at me and she goes, really? You'd be willing to do that? All of a sudden I started second guessing myself. No, I said, yeah, I mean, that is something that I do. That is part of the work that I do on a daily basis, part of the work that I saw the people in my family, my parents do, my dad do on a daily basis. So this is very much a normal part of my life. And I will say that I saw the other Democratic reps up there as well too, Representative Love, Clemens, all those folks were up there. And there are quite a number of folks on the other side of the aisle as well in there too. And one of the first folks that I saw as I came back down from the place where the parliamentarian stands, where I offered that invocation and prayer, was one of the Republican reps who shook my hand and said, "Thanks for being there." Now, what the other folks did, they got to do what they got to do. My sense was, how do I meet this moment? I asked for this opportunity, kind of joking. We ended up taking it seriously. But I don't want to make it a moment. It is just a routine part of how House floor sessions open, right? So how do I meet that moment for what it is? Craft something that speaks to the legislators and the work they're doing, place a charge and try to invoke a certain sense as they go about that work in an honest way, not in a Trojan horse type of way. I really wanted to do exactly that. And then also create room for myself, for the communities that I'm a part of, for the broader community of communities, that is the whole LGBTQIA plus spectrum, and for the whole variety of us that don't feel included in that space on a regular basis, which, let's be honest, is a larger and larger swath of us. A greater and greater number of us feel as if our voices aren't heard in that space, as if they're not being represented by the folks that we've asked to represent us. And so my hope was to both give charge to the legislators to remind them that as they do their work, they're there to represent all of the folks in their various districts and constituencies, and also to help that great variety of folks to try to say something that great variety of folks beyond that space who feel excluded so often, to try to craft something and to say something that allowed space for them in that room, in that moment as well.
I mean, you came up to the House, the State House, to lead that prayer, but you're also up there working. What are some of the problematic bills this year?
So that have passed forward the marriage law that was reduced down to just 10 words. But as Senator Lamar noted, it is obvious that even in these 10 words that we're trying to target specific populations. And let's just be honest about that, because what it says is that it allows folks not to solemnize a marriage, allows public officials not to solemnize a marriage if they so choose. Phrase that as generically as you want to, it's still ultra-targeted. So it's very disappointing. It had passed the House last year, it passed the Senate this year, went straight to the governor's desk, and has already been signed, which should show something about the intentionality of how we're going to exclude and narrow the range of voices that the state says are a legitimate part of our daily life. Then you have the anti-pride flag bill, which also bars the exhibition or display of many other types of flags as well, which in a classroom setting are not meant to set forth a malicious agenda has been ominously intoned from the dais in many a House committee room so far, but are really just a symbol of safety and belonging. Do you feel uncertain about your way in this world? Do you feel unsure about who you are and you just want a safe person to talk with about? Here's a little symbol. It can just be a sticker on the back of a computer, right? Yeah. That says, here's a safe space for you to be able to express that. Kind of goes back to that grief work, right? This person is saying that they're willing, regardless of what their lives are like, are willing to be a safe space for that person to express what's going on with them. That's what those symbols are meant to demonstrate. The issues are so many where folks feel as if their voices aren't being heard. If you go back to special session all the way up to today, or back into session in the spring last year, or back into the session in the year before that, or back into the session the year before that, what you see consistently is a wide range of folks who are asking, just like Job did, where is the one who will defend me? Where is the one who will speak to the reality of my experience? Who will support that? Whether that's been on gun issues or race, we have more and more spaces, more and more education that can't be offered about our basic histories, about the variety of folks in our communities, basic histories and experience of the world because of what's being passed down there. It's not easy, right? To go back to my mom's phrase that she repeated in my childhood, when you say the solution most often is found as more voices, not fewer, you're not giving yourself an easier job. And she was upfront about that. She said, this is going to be the harder work, and it's going to be tough, and there are going to be times when you think, to heck with it. Let's just settle on the simple thing. I'll go with my way, and to heck with everybody else, right? But that's not going to allow for the creative possibility that comes out of the dissonant voices, the chaos that comes out in those moments. So when we have folks say, I need you to hear me on how gun violence is ripping apart not just my life, but my community, when we have folks continuing to cry out that when you take money away from my child's school and school district, you're leaving my autistic child, hanging them out to dry because the dollars that come from the Fed mostly go to support ADA and IDEA programs. When we have trans folks and LGBTQIA folks saying, where is the one who will stand up and represent and offer voice to me of my experience in this space and keep space open for that rather than trying to close it out, rather than trying to blank out the voices, push out of the public sphere entirely. If you don't think that that's what bathroom bills are all about, then you're grossly mistaken, because we're saying this basic human need that all of us have, you're not allowed space for in public. When we blank out all of those things, we've done so at the cost of erasing, figuratively and other ways as well too, just so that we can have that simplicity. I said it on the floor that day, and I continue to mean it now. Out of such chaos, creation comes. And if we don't allow ourselves the range of those voices, then we don't know what creative potential there is to come out of them, because we're all just singing like this all the time, instead of allowing ourselves the possibility of what those additional voices might grant us.
Dahron, I really thank you so much for being here with us today and for being here in our state. You know, I mean, we've been losing trans friends, trans leaders and activists because of the legislation you're speaking of. They're moving to other states to sustain health care just to protect their safety or to live happily with nobody messing with them. Last question for you. Why do you stay?
Because for all the talk that we've had today of grief, there is hope. And that hope comes through the change that, yes, sometimes produces loss. Yes, sometimes produces grief. But in the midst of stepping forward, in the midst of allowing myself to live authentically as I am and always have been, regardless of what clothes were on the outside, that I see other folks doing that too. And that their energy and their increased life, their increased potential for joy and energy and determination are such model and example for me, and I hope lots of others as well too, that in the process of change and taking on those tough explorations of self, we can come to places of greater joy, of greater potential, and find a community of those who are simply eager to live into the fullness of their lives. And when you start doing work with them, when you start trying to hold the line, like we're simply trying to do so much of the time now, that folks with Tennessee Equality Project that I've worked with throughout all of this and has been working to secure the rights of LGBTQIA plus folks in Tennessee for the last 20 years, you create bonds of trust because those folks have allowed you to be who you are, and you've worked to try to allow them to be who they are, and you've really been able to bond and connect with each other. That's so hope-giving. That's so life-giving, because in those folks and in those connections, you can see the possibility of being able to do better, of being able to build something better, of create something better. And that's why I stay, because I want to be able to continue that work of creating something better for our communities.
Dahron Anneliese Johnson is a chaplain, trans rights activist, and an expert in grief work. Dahron, thank you Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate this conversation.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
And thanks to you for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced and directed by Tasha A.F. Lemley. Our board operators, Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind our theme music are Larange and Namir Blade. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get your podcasts. And the conversation doesn't end here. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. Find us on Instagram and tell us what you want from our show by filling out our quick survey online. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Ekalona. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody, and be good to each other.